News of the Times. The Byfleet Poisoning. The Murder of Alfred Jones. True crime in 1924. On a spring night in 1924, the respected licensee of a Surrey hotel collapsed and died within minutes after taking what should have been an ordinary dose of bromo-salts. But when doctors examined him, nothing about his death was ordinary. His organs were congested, his symptoms didn't match the medicine, and the moment the inquest opened, the police quietly began treating the case as suspicious. Because someone, it seemed, had slipped poison into his daily routine, and the circle of people who could have done so was remarkably small. The Blue Anchor mystery, the strange death of Alfred George Pointer Jones, a rare male poisoning case, a wife under scrutiny, a foreign waiter with secrets, and a hotel full of witnesses who noticed far more than they first admitted. We'll explore the forensic missteps, the contradictory testimonies, the reopened inquest, and the extraordinary trial that followed. Was this a tragic accident, a carefully planned murder, or something far more complicated? For tonight's further particulars, we remain in 1924, where a rather unusual New Year's Eve tradition unfolded in Westminster. While most people were content with singing Auld Lang Syne, a considerable number of Londoners, including several gentlemen described as of the highest respectability, elected instead to gather round a pit in Duck Lane to watch a dog attempt to kill 100 rats against the clock, as you do. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you'd kindly take your seats and do ensure your sensibilities are firmly strapped in, we're about to be transported back to the year 1924, a time of motor cars and monocles, when wireless sets crackled with promise, when gentlemen bet on absolutely anything that moved, and when, as we shall shortly see, the definition of wholesome entertainment was rather more elastic than one might hope. So settle back, adjust your hat to a jaunty but respectable angle, and allow us to present a little tableau from the age of enamel bathtubs, starched collars, and murder. From the Surrey Advertiser, the 2nd of April, 1924. Byfleet licensee's death. Inquest adjourned for analysis. In mysterious circumstances, Mr. Alfred George Pointer Jones, licensee of the Blue Anchor Hotel in Byfleet, died suddenly on Saturday morning, soon after taking medicine. At the inquest, which opened yesterday, on Tuesday, and adjourned for an analysis of the internal organs and their contents, evidence was given that Mr. Jones told a doctor that he had taken poison and was in a state of extreme fright. At the inquest, opened by Mr. Gilbert H. White at the Railway Hotel, West Byfleet, Mr. P. Ashcroft, representing the Isleworth Brewery, owners of the Blue Anchor Hotel. The coroner said by the report it appeared the deceased was apparently in quite good health on Friday evening and went to bed probably rather late. On Saturday morning he had breakfast in bed and soon after coming downstairs felt a headache and took some salts in water. After taking the salts he was apparently very ill and died 15 or 20 minutes later. From the report he considered it necessary to have the contents of the stomach analysed and should defer as much evidence as possible and he adjourned the inquest to a later date. Terrible fright. Dr. F. J. Cale said he had previously attended the deceased, who had enjoyed very good average health. He was called by telephone at 11:45 on Saturday morning and arrived at 11:50. Found the deceased alone and conscious. He was in a state of terrible fright and was violently convulsed. Witness considered him beyond aid. The deceased partially recovered from the convulsion and wished for a drink. An attempt was made to give him water, but a second convulsion occurred in which he died. Witness made a post-mortem examination on Monday, and there was no external marks of violence, and internally he found no evidence of organic disease, but the organs of the body generally were in a state of extreme congestion. The deceased was a married man with 2 children and came to Byfleet last September from Kingston, where he was well known in the catering business. His widow is prostrated by her tragic bereavement. Mr. Jones bought the Blue Anchor Hotel from Frenchwoman named Madame Goulerin. While she was there, the French visitors were frequently at her house, which is one of the prettiest parts of the district. Mr. Jones at one time had 3 catering houses at Kingston, and he carried out extensive catering arrangements on the Brooklands racing track. Alfred George Pointer Jones, a publican in decline. Alfred Jones was 38, a husband and a father of 2 young children, and, at least outwardly, a man building a respectable, stable life. A former Kingston caterer with several businesses to his name, he had once run a large commercial operation at the Brooklands racing track, a sign not only of entrepreneurial energy but of real standing within the local trade. By the autumn of 1923, however, his fortunes had begun to dip. He took the tenancy of the Blue Anchor Hotel in Byfleet in August 1923, relocating his wife and children into what was meant to be a fresh start. Friends described him as sociable, competent, and generally healthy, although increasingly fond of drink. His regular morning pick-me-up of bromo-salts was not unusual for the period, but for Alfred it had become a small daily ritual to steady himself after the night before. There is no suggestion in the record that Mr. Jones had enemies, debts of note, or dangerous professional entanglements. And then, on one spring morning in 1924, he collapsed and died in violent spasms, with his wife and children upstairs in the same building. Mabel Teresa Jones. Mabel's story, however, is far less straightforward. By late 1923, the Jones family was under severe financial strain. Her catering business had collapsed, liabilities exceeded £3,700, and she would soon undergo a full bankruptcy examination. Under this pressure, she suffered what contemporary newspapers described as a nervous breakdown. It was on medical advice, she said, that she travelled alone to France in early January 1924, specifically to Biarritz, a fashionable destination for rest cures among the middle and upper classes. And it was there, on the Hotel Sands, that she met Jean-Pierre Vaquier. He was charming, older, foreign, and a lecturer in radio telephony, and he possessed of that vaguely cosmopolitan glamour that would appear irresistible to somebody exhausted by domestic strain. Neither spoke the other's language, and yet, through a shared dictionary, a relationship formed. They walked together, dined together, exchanged photographs and gifts, and eventually shared hotel rooms in both Biarritz and Paris. When she returned to England on the 8th of February, it was not the end. Vaquier followed her back within days, lodged at the Hotel Russell, and then, astonishingly, took up residence at the Blue Anchor, living under the same roof as the husband. He was soon accused of poisoning. Throughout February and March, staff noticed the intimacy, the whispered conversations, the constant presence, the late-night walks, the possessiveness, the kisses, the jealousy, and his increasing attempts to persuade her to leave her husband. Mabel later insisted that by early March the affair had ended. Perhaps so, but the damage was done. She was now the centre point of an emotional and financial triangle. A husband recovering from illness and drinking heavily, a lover who had followed her across borders, and a public reputation collapsing under bankruptcy, scandal and scrutiny. The sudden violent death of Alfred Jones, a man in his 30s, generally healthy and dead within minutes of taking a routine morning remedy, could not be left unexplained. Within hours, the coroner for West Byfleet convened an urgent inquest, hoping at least for a preliminary sense of what had happened. But Dr. Carl's post-mortem only deepened the mystery. There was no natural disease, no external injury, only severe internal congestion, the sort seen in cases of poisoning. With no clear cause of death and no explanation of how a bottle of ordinary salts could have turned deadly, the coroner took the unusual step of immediately suspending the proceedings. The stomach and the intestines were sealed on the spot and sent to the Home Office laboratory for chemical analysis, a process that would take far longer than anyone expected. While the public waited for the scientists, the police did not. They began the quiet work of looking backward through the life of the man who had died and the household in which he lived, and almost at once something curious surfaced. For behind the respectable facade of the Blue Anchor, the Jones family finances were in serious collapse. And as further reports began to surface in the press, the account of that morning grew sharper still, particularly concerning the taste of the salts and the first signs that something had gone terribly wrong. From the Lancashire Evening Post, the 2nd of April, 1924, landlord's strange death, organs sent for analysis, doctor's evidence at the inquest. What is the mystery behind the death of Alfred George Pointer Jones, licensee of the Blue Anchor Hotel in Byfleet, who died 15 minutes after taking a pick-me-up? Certain organs the body have been sent for analysis. On Saturday, he was in the bar parlour with his wife and some visitors. He drank bromo-salts and immediately complained that it did not taste quite right and that there was no fizz in it. His wife poured some into her hand and tasted it and agreed that it tasted bitter. Mr. Jones was seized with convulsions. In the post-mortem examination, the witness found the organs in a state of extreme congestion. He had handed part of the remains to the police. At this stage, the coroner adjourned the inquest until April the 16th. Mr. and Mrs. Jones formerly owned a catering business at Kingston, where they have 2 houses, and often did the catering at Brooklands motor track. Last year, Mrs. Jones filed her petition in bankruptcy and had her public examination 3 weeks ago. She admitted liabilities amounting to £3,718, having lost £3,000 last year. From the Daily Mirror, the 2nd of May, 1924, riddle of the bottle. Mrs. Jones very eager to save her husband. Deathbed drama. Dr. Frederick Carl described arriving at the Blue Anchor to find Alfred Jones conscious but in a state he could only describe as extreme terror. Jones said he feared he had taken poison, although he couldn't name it, and within minutes fell into the convulsions that ended his life. Mrs. Jones told the doctor that her husband had taken his usual dose of bromo-salts, had complained they were extremely bitter, and that she herself had tasted them and found the same. When Dr. Carl asked for the bottle, Mrs. Whitewick fetched it from another room. It was empty of solids and contained only a small quantity of clear liquid. "This bottle has only just been rinsed out," the doctor remarked. No one present could explain why. He then asked for the glass in which the salts had been mixed. That too contained only a trace of clear fluid. On the floor of the bar parlour, where Mrs. Jones said some of the salt had spilt, the doctors noticed a sprinkling of white crystals, partly dissolved, partly intact. He collected them carefully and handed the packet to the constable. During this time Vaquier was present, at first standing silently in the bedroom doorway, later seated in the bar parlour, saying nothing while the doctor worked. With the bottle mystery deepening and no natural cause of death apparent, the coroner adjourned the inquiry and appealed for information from any chemist. The laboratory took far longer than expected. Week after week passed. The inquest was adjourned twice, and still the analysts continued their work. But when the results finally arrived, the mystery hardened into something far darker. The stomach contents of Alfred Jones contained strychnine, a poison with no medicinal purpose here, and certainly not found in any commercial preparation of bromo-salts. Whatever had killed Alfred, it had not been an accident. And while the chemists worked, the detectives had not been idle. They interviewed the staff at the Blue Anchor, examined the movements of everyone in the house, and began piecing together the small stray remarks that people make when they believe they're speaking off the record. It didn't take long for the first cracks to appear. Behind the polite silence of hotel life, the officers uncovered a story none of them had expected. A woman under pressure, a marriage weakened by illness and drink, and most startlingly, a Frenchman who had arrived at the hotel only weeks earlier and attached himself to Mrs. Jones with remarkable persistence. What began as murmurs became testimony. Whispered observations became statements. And soon detectives realized that the newcomer, charming, intense, foreign, and entirely out of place in a Surrey hotel, had not been merely a guest. He had been living under the same roof as the victim. By the time the laboratory confirmed the presence of strychnine, the police no longer spoke of mysterious circumstances. They spoke instead of motive, opportunity, and an increasingly uncomfortable proximity between Mrs. Jones and the man whose bills her husband had been asked to cover. From the Daily Mirror on the 22nd of April 1924, court remands the Frenchman. Charge of giving strychnine to inn landlord. Oui, his solitary reply to allegations. Following his dramatic arrest, the Frenchman Jean-Jacques Vaquier was at Woking yesterday but remanded for 8 days on the charge of murdering Mr. Alfred Pointer Jones, the Byfleet Inn landlord. On entering the dock, Vaquier bowed politely to the magistrate and listened intently to the charge as it was translated to him. It accused him of administering strychnine to Mr. Jones. He had been told that the need not plead, and "we" was his only remark when the charge was read. Superintendent Vaquier said he could offer no evidence that day, and a remand would enable him to communicate with the public prosecutor. Strychnine poisoning. Pale but smiling, prisoner hears charge through an interpreter. Sunshine was streaming through the windows of the little police court this morning when Jean-Pierre Vaquier, the middle-aged Frenchman arrested in connection with the mysterious death of Mr. Alfred Pointer Jones, the landlord of the Blue Anchor Hotel, Byfleet, was brought up on the charge of murder. As he entered the dock, looking pale, Vaquier delivered a most courteous bow to the magistrate, then turned to where the reporters were sitting and smiled. He speaks little English, and an interpreter was present. With his right hand to his ear, Vaquier, a picturesque brown bearded figure in a fawn-coloured raincoat intently followed the proceedings. The specific charge was that Mr. Vaquier poisoned Mr. Jones with strychnine. Before the charge was translated, Vacquier's solicitor reminded him that under English procedure he need not enter a plea, and so, when the accusation was finally read out, his only response was the single word the newspapers seized upon: oui. With the investigation still developing, Superintendent Vaquier offered no evidence that day and requested a remand while he consulted the public prosecutor. From the Surrey Advertiser, the 23rd of April 1924, Byfleet Poison Mystery. The Frenchman accused of murder. Quiet arrest at a Woking hotel. Charged with administering strychnine. Police inquiries and arrest. Meanwhile, the police had been making extensive and exhaustive inquiries. The arrest of Monsieur Vaquier was quietly effected. He was sitting in the coffee room of the railway hotel in Woking, listening to some French music which was being played by a lady guest, when Superintendent Vaquier entered and called to him. He rose and was at once taken to the police station. Deputy Chief Constable Kenwood was at the station, and Monsieur Vaquier was formally charged with the murder of Mr. Jones. Monsieur Vaquier is stated to hail from Biarritz and is an electrical engineer. He came to England, he has stated, to transact business in connection with inventions for a sausage machine and improvements to the telephone. Jean-Pierre Vaquier, the man from Biarritz. A Frenchman in his late 40s, soft-spoken, bearded, and unfailingly courteous, Jean-Pierre Vaquier presented himself as an electrical engineer, a man of ideas rather than violence. Born in Biarritz and accustomed to the quieter rhythms of continental seaside towns, he cut an unusual figure in suburban Surrey. He spoke almost no English. He carried French newspapers, and he had a talent for appearing both dignified and evasive at the same time. According to his own account, he came to England on business connected with a string of inventions: a mechanical device for sausage production, a supposed improvement to telephone transmission, and various other electrical notions hovering somewhere between the practical and the speculative. Whether these inventions ever existed is another matter. But whatever his purpose in England, his presence at the Blue Anchor Hotel would soon place him at the centre of a murder inquiry. For all his courtesy and continental ease, Vacquier's presence at the Blue Anchor soon drew quiet notice. He was not merely a passing guest. He had arrived suddenly, stayed indefinitely, and made himself a familiar figure in the daily life of the household. To the police, reviewing statements and timings, it became increasingly clear that when Alfred Jones died in violent convulsions on the floor of his own hotel, this Frenchman was living under the same roof and had been for several weeks. As the adjourned inquest resumed, the evidence turned sharply from circumstance to substance. For the first time, a witness connected Jean-Pierre Vaquier directly to strychnine, and in quantities that could not be explained away as accident or misunderstanding. From the Daily Mirror, the 2nd of May, 1924, chemists Byfleet sold Frenchman enough to kill 4 people. Sensational evidence of the purchase of strychnine by the Frenchman Vaquier was given at the resumed inquest yesterday on Mr. Alfred Jones, the Byfleet hotel keeper who died after taking a dose of salts. Mr. Bland, a London chemist, said he sold Vaquier in the name of Vaquier enough strychnine to kill 4 persons. He, Vaquier, said it was for wireless experiments. Witness also told how he identified Vaquier from among a row of bearded men. Vaquier recognised him first and greeted him with "Oh, bonjour, monsieur." Dr. Carl of Byfleet said the bottle from which the salts had been taken was empty when handed to him. Mrs. Jones, the widow, collapsed during the proceedings. The coroner adjourned the inquiry for a month. Mr. Bland revealed that the Frenchman had been a regular visitor to his shop throughout February and was known to staff under the name Monsieur Vaquier. At first his purchases were harmless enough, small quantities of chemicals for what he described as wireless experiments. Then on the 1st of March he handed over a new list, this time including perchloride of mercury and strychnine. Bland hesitated. Mercury he could just about rationalise. Strychnine he could not. Vaquier reassured him that he was well known in France as a wireless experimenter and could obtain any amount of strychnine there. In the end, Bland relented. The poison was sold, and the chemist's register shows the signature J. Vaquier. After Mr. Jones's death, Bland appeared to see a photograph in the newspapers. The face, he said, was unmistakable. He alerted the police and was later asked to attend a formal identification. Placed among a line of bearded men, the Frenchman did not wait to be pointed out. He looked directly at the chemist and smiled and said, "Bonjour, monsieur." Contemporary reports observed that this was a striking greeting given the purpose of the identification parade. With the chemist's evidence now on the record and the identification parade confirming the name Vaquier, the investigation had moved beyond coincidence. The police had established that Jean-Pierre Vaquier had purchased strychnine only weeks before the death, had used an alias to obtain it, and had been living inside the Blue Anchor throughout the period in question. What they did not yet have was a motive. That would not emerge until the case left the inquest chamber behind and entered the far more revealing arena of the Crown Court, where the prosecution would for the first time set out the human story behind the forensic trail. And at the centre of that story was a conversation said to have taken place in the hours after Alfred Jones died, a conversation the newspapers would seize upon, and one which, if true, stunned the courtroom into silence. From the Daily Mirror, the 10th of May 1924, accused him of killing husband. Crown case opened. Friendship that began at Biarritz. Mrs. Jones, you assassinated him. Vaquier, yes, Mabs, but for you. The dramatic dialogue stated that by Mrs. Jones to have taken place after Mr. Jones's death was quoted by Mr. Room in opening the Crown case yesterday against Jean-Pierre Vaquier, charged with poisoning Mr. Alfred Jones, landlord of the Blue Anchor Inn in Byfleet. According to Mrs. Jones, said counsel, she replied, "I would have killed you. He has always been good to me." Vaquier in a statement said, "I swear on my mother's tomb I'm innocent." Counsel said Mrs. Jones met Vaquier at Biarritz. The man followed her to England and urged her to leave her husband. He bought enough strychnine to kill 4 people. The Crown's account of the Biarritz friendship. According to the Crown, the connection between Mrs. Jones and Jean-Pierre Vaquier began only 10 weeks before Alfred Jones's death. During her January stay at the Hotel Victoria in Biarritz, unable to speak each other's language, the pair communicated through a shared dictionary, exchanging photographs and walking together on the beach before Mrs. Jones returned to England. Each gave the other a tie pin. The Crown said the friendship deepened when she returned briefly to Biarritz, and that by the end of the month they were living together at the Hotel Dijon. as husband and wife. Early in February, they travelled on to Bordeaux and Paris in the same manner. Mrs. Jones returned alone to England on the 8th of February. Vaquier followed within days, registering at the Hotel Russell in London. She visited him there, and when challenged by staff the next morning, she was said to have replied, "I am his wife." On the 14th of February, Vaquier travelled to Byfleet and took up residence at the Blue Anchor Hotel, explaining that he wished to stay for about a month. He remained a guest under the same roof as the Jones family until the day of Alfred's death. When the Crown turned from events in France to life inside the Blue Anchor, the testimony of the household staff painted an even clearer picture of Vaquier's conduct in the weeks leading up to Alfred Jones's death. From the Daily Mirror, the 10th of May 1924, accused him of killing husband. "For you, Mabs," Crown case opened. Friendship that began at Biarritz. Witness stated that Vaquier was in the habit of following Mrs. Jones about wherever she went. In fact, Mrs. Whitewick, the housekeeper, often remarked that wherever Mrs. Jones went, Vaquier was sure to be there. He was seen to kiss Mrs. Jones and was always apparently bent on accompanying her. He would refuse to take his meals unless she was in the room with him. On several occasions, so Mrs. Jones said, Vaquier pleaded with her to leave her husband and go away with him, but she refused. In consequence of his illness, Mr. Jones became irritable, and sometimes Mrs. Jones was seen to be crying. The fact that Mr. Jones was a heavy drinker, after a drinking bout, he was in the habit of taking a dose of bromo-salts. These salts were taken from a bottle kept on the mantelpiece in the bar parlour. On March the 28th, Vaquier had a conversation with Mr. Jones about his bill. He had not paid anything since he came there on February the 13th. He told Mr. Jones not to worry, as he was expecting a cheque from America and was sure to get £500. Vaquier also asked Mr. Jones to lend him some money, but Mrs. Jones strongly advised her husband not to do so. The inquest then turned to the events of the morning itself, beginning with the testimony of the housekeeper and cook. Strange bottle in bar. Allegations that Vaquier moved the iodine from its place on the shelf. On March the 29th, Vaquier was the first to get up. Mrs. Fisher, the cook, came down at 7:15 and found Vaquier in the kitchen drinking coffee. At about 8:30, Mrs. Whitewick, the housekeeper, came into the kitchen and later took some tea to Mr. and Mrs. Jones. Mrs. Jones poured it out and her husband drank. Later, Mr. Jones got up and went into the parlour for a few minutes. Vaquier was there. Mrs. Jones says that her husband seemed very well and very happy at the time. When Mrs. Whitewick was dusting in the bar parlour, she noticed two strange bottles on the mantelpiece. One of them seemed to be different from which she usually contained the bromo-salts. The other bottle contained iodine. Mrs. Whitewick saw Vaquier move the bottle of iodine from one side of the shelf to the other. Some minutes later, Mr. Jones called for a glass of water. He took the bottle, which was supposed to contain the bromo-salts, and mixed the salt. According to Mrs. Jones, her husband commented that the salts wouldn't fizz that morning and swallowed them in one gulp before exclaiming that they were bitter. She said she tasted them herself and found the same bitterness, with a few crystals falling to the floor. She later stated that she told him, "Yes, Daddy, they have been tampered with." What happened next came from several household witnesses. Mrs. Jones went to fetch salt water while Vaquier followed her into the kitchen. The cook said Mrs. Jones placed the bottle in a drawer, remarking that it ought to be analysed. Moments later, Mr. Jones collapsed, and with Vacier's assistance he was carried upstairs. During the commotion, the cook said Vaquier returned to the kitchen asking for doctor medicine quick, and opened the drawer where the salt bottle was kept. When it was later retrieved, the doctor found it recently rinsed and contained only a small amount of liquid, no salts at all. With the inquest evidence complete, the altered bottle, the crystals on the floor, the chemist's testimony, and the presence of strychnine in the stomach established by the Home Office analysts, the coroner concluded that the case had been made to answer. Dr. Bernard Spilsbury was consulted on the toxicological findings, confirming that the amount of strychnine present was far in excess of anything accidental. Although both Vaquier and Mrs. Jones made allegations about one another in the days following Alfred's death, no charge was brought against the widow. The magistrates ruled that only one person should stand before a jury, and so the case moved from the inquest chamber to the assizes, where the Crown would set out its full argument against the Frenchman. From the Daily Mirror, the 5th of June 1924, Vaquier sent for trial. New statement. Mrs. Jones is innocent of this plot. Widow's collapse. Magisterial investigations were completed yesterday in the Byfleet Inn mystery, and Jean-Pierre Vaquier, the Frenchman, was sent for trial at the Surrey Assizes next month on the charge of murdering Alfred Jones by poison. In a new statement read by Crown Counsel, Vaquier was reported to have said Mrs. Jones is absolutely innocent. When the trial moved into the defence case, Vacier's counsel introduced a written statement the Frenchman had composed after his arrest. It was not a denial of the physical evidence, the chemist's book, the aliases, the proximity, but an appeal to the jury to see his motives in a different light. He portrayed himself as a man moved to pity for Mrs. Jones, troubled by what he believed to be her unhappiness, and anxious to shield her from blame. The statement was then read aloud in court. A further statement said to have been made by Vaquier after his arrest was put in by Mr. Room. The translation read, "I say and affirm that Mrs. Jones is absolutely innocent, and no doubt is possible. One day after a scene I never understood about what, Mrs. Jones went to her room and gave full vent to her unhappiness. I went to the kitchen and asked the servants what had happened. The younger wrote the following on a piece of paper in English, and I afterwards translated it. With such a man I should not stay long. That evening I saw Mrs. Jones still in deep trouble. I advised her not to live like that, but once and for all to leave Mr. Jones. She wrote, I always suffer. I have never done wrong. Leave Mr. Jones. No, I have children. Another time Mrs. Jones went away, and I thought that in despair she had gone to drown herself, and I went to look for her with one of the servants. When I returned, she was there, and I communicated my fears to her. She wrote, destroy myself? Never. I always forgive Mr. Jones because it is the drink. The woman has to suffer. When at Biarritz, she received a letter from Mr. Jones. She was so happy that the tears came into her eyes. When she received a telegram asking her to come back, she was very happy. No one can say Mrs. Jones did not love her husband. No other woman would put up with what she suffered. As the trial drew to its close, the jury were left with a stark choice. On one side stood the Crown's tight chain of circumstantial evidence, a deliberate purchase of strychnine under a false name, a bottle of bromo-salts found rinsed clean within minutes of Mr. Jones's collapse, crystals on the floor that should never have been there, and a witness chain placing Vaquier in the bar parlour at the crucial moment. Layered over this were weeks of testimony about his attachment to Mrs. Jones, the walks, the letters, the hotel rooms in France, and the increasing pressure he placed upon her to leave her husband. The defence, meanwhile, offered only two pillars: Vacquier's repeated declarations of affection for Mrs. Jones and his insistence, sometimes calm, sometimes desperate, that a plot of unknown origin had ensnared them both. No alternative suspect was identified. No motive was suggested beyond the Crown's own narrative, and the jury were asked to consider whether pity and romantic devotion were compatible with poisoning. There were undeniable gaps and ambiguities in the evidence. The rinsed bottle was unexplained, the handling of the salts was confused, and the only two people closest to the deceased that morning, the widow and the man accused, told stories that aligned only when it advantaged them. But after several days of legal argument, expert testimony, and a lengthy summing up, the case went to the jury. They retired, and 98 minutes later they returned to court with their decision. From the Daily Mirror, the 7th of July, 1924, Vacquier's struggle in the dock when sentenced to death. Vaquier in a frenzy. I swear on the still fresh graves of my father and mother that I am innocent. In a voice trembling with emotion, Vaquier made his impassioned reply to the judge's question whether he had anything to say. Later in the afternoon, the jury had returned a verdict of guilty after an absence of 98 minutes. When the dread sentence had been pronounced, the Frenchman, in a frenzy of emotion, gripped the rail in front of the dock. It is an infamous verdict, he said to the jury. All the witnesses are liars. I have been betrayed by the cold, compassionate voice of the judge broke in at this moment. Let him be removed. 3 warders seized the gesticulating little Frenchman. He clung with the strength of a madman to the dock rails, but they at last forced him to release his grip. I will defend myself, Vaquier shouted, as, struggling desperately, he was forced down the steps to the cells. So ended one of the most sensational murder trials of recent years. Throughout the judge's summing up and the final speech of the counsel, Vaquier had sat calmly, as though he were a privileged spectator at a play rather than the central figure in a life and death drama. Only when the jury returned after an absence that seemed interminable, and his fate was sealed by the foreman's one word, guilty, did Vaquier grow signs of emotion. It was not necessary to translate the verdict. The Frenchman understood. His eyes blazed and his face twitched, but his well-poised head remained as immovable as a piece of statuary. The execution of Jean-Pierre Vaquier brought the legal story to an end, but it did little to settle the questions that had troubled observers throughout the case. The facts, as the jury weighed them, formed a clear chain. The purchase of strychnine under a false name, the rinsed bottle, the crystals on the floor, the opportunity created by his presence in the bar parlour at the crucial moment. Against that, the defence offered only his declarations of affection and the suggestion of a shadowy plot for which no evidence was ever produced. In the world of 1924, it was not enough. Yet even now, a century later, the case resists perfect closure. The handling of the bottle was confused. Witnesses contradicted one another in the small details. Mrs. Jones herself was both central to the story and curiously untouched by its legal consequences. A woman whose testimony shaped the Crown's narrative and yet whose actions that morning were never fully dissected in court. Was Vaquier a calculating poisoner, a deluded romantic, or a convenient scapegoat? Or, as the prosecution insisted, a man whose passion crossed the line into lethal intent? The historical record cannot answer with certainty. What remains is the image left by the newspapers, a slight, bearded Frenchman gripping the dock rails, proclaiming his innocence, with the intensity of a man who either believed every word or knew it was the last he would ever speak in a public court. And behind him, in the quiet lanes of Byfleet, the blue anchor returned to ordinary life. The salt bottles vanished into the files of the Home Office laboratory. The newspapers moved on to fresher scandals, and Alfred Jones, the man whose death had set the entire machinery of justice in motion, became, as so many victims of that era did, a name preserved largely in the shadow of the person accused of killing him. If there is one constant across these Victorian and Edwardian poison cases, it is this: the facts may be tested, weighed and arranged, but the truth, the private truth of marriages, motives, resentments and moments of impulse, often remain just beyond reach. All its drama, the Byfleet poisoning leaves us with a quieter, more uncomfortable reflection. Sometimes the law reaches a definitive conclusion, while history does not. Epilogue. What became of Mabel Theresa Jones? In the aftermath of the trial, the newspapers turned their attention to Vacier's appeals and final days. But Mabel Jones, whose life had been entwined with every stage of the story, quietly slipped out of view. Despite the affair, the intimate letters, and her presence throughout the hours leading to her husband's death, she was never charged with any offence. The police and the prosecution alike treated her not as a suspect, but as a principal witness, and whatever suspicions lingered in the public imagination were never translated into law. Alfred Jones had died without a will, and in May 1924 the courts granted Mabel letters of administration to his modest estate, just under £1,400 once debts were settled. It wasn't a fortune, but it provided some stability after the collapse of the family's catering business, a collapse that had driven her to France in the first place. After the verdict, however, she withdrew almost entirely from public life. Reports spoke of her collapsing during proceedings, of being prostrated by grief, and of being unable to attend the sentence. What is certain is that she did not reappear at any later hearings, nor did she comment publicly on the case again. Further particulars. Tonight's further particulars brings us a story so gloriously British it could only have happened in a nation that queues for everything, including apparently organised rodent carnage. Picture it: Westminster, midnight. Carriages and costermongers' carts arriving side by side, respectable gentlemen, pillars of society, jostling for a good view of a dog named Billy, who had been tasked with killing 100 fully grown rats in under 8 minutes. If you're thinking, surely not, we invite you to think again. And yes, there were refreshments. Let us proceed. From the Derby Daily Telegraph on the 1st of January 1924. Unprecedented feat. On Friday evening at midnight, numbers of persons of every denomination were seen hurrying in the direction of Duck Lane, Westminster. Previous notice having been given that the phenomenon dog Billy was again matched to do the extraordinary feat of killing 100 full-grown rats in the wonderfully short time of 8 minutes. Such indeed was the interest excited by so novel an exhibition that numbers of gentlemen of the highest respectability, amongst whom were several sporting characters of great note, repaired to the scene of action with the intention of betting on the occasion. At about 8 o'clock, all the streets and avenues leading to the pit in Duck Lane were crowded by vehicles in every direction, from the gentleman's carriage to the costermonger's cart, and the pit, by direction of the proprietor, was freshly painted and lit up by a great number of lamps, so that the spectators might have a full view of what was going forward. Soon after 8 o'clock, Mitchell the rat catcher arrived with the rats. They appeared of uncommon size and full of life. Charles Dew, the owner of Billy, appeared, and a scarlet-coloured jacket edged with gold, and a waistcoat literally made of the skins of the rats killed by Billy in his last encounter. He likewise wore on his breast a silver star, given to him by some gentleman of the fancy. Exactly at 20 minutes past 8, Billy was let into the pit by his master, and the scene of death began. Although the pit was crowded to excess, a pin might have been heard to drop. Such was the mute astonishment produced on seeing the wonderful quickness and dexterity of Billy in destroying his active adversaries. Exactly 6 minutes 13 seconds had elapsed after Billy's admission into the pit, when, to the astonishment of every person present, the whole of the rats lay extended on the ground, lifeless. Billy received little or no injury. He was taken from the pit by his master, his jaw and head completely drenched with the blood of the slaughtered vermin. Billy was conveyed home amidst the caresses of his backers, who won large sums of money on the occasion. And with that, the Byfleet Poisoning draws to a close. A tale of salts that fizzed when they shouldn't, friendships that deepened when they shouldn't, and a great many people behaving exactly as one hopes they wouldn't. That scratching outside the study wall is becoming persistent. No, I'm sure. I think it's not rats. Probably, almost certainly. Do let me know if it starts spelling out messages. If you enjoyed tonight's descent into the archives, do show the love to the channel with a like, a comment, or the ceremonial tapping of the subscribe button. It is, as ever, most kind. And if you'd like to join our ever-expanding library over on Patreon, now approaching 900 episodes, with uploads 6 days a week across 6 exclusive series, you are warmly invited. It's where all our deepest dives, oddities, and long-form investigations live, and we'd be delighted to have you. This has been News of the Times, and I am Robin Coles, part-time historian, full-time drinker of lukewarm tea, and occasionally interrupted by household mysteries best left unresolved. Until next time, mind the salts, question the fizz, and have a very ordinary day.